I'd like to welcome you all to the research tool presentation on green eating. My name is Ian Israelson. I'm a senior at West Virginia University. I'd like to remind you, if you have any questions during the presentation, to write them in the chat, and we will address them after the presentation concludes. Geoffrey Greene, PhD, MPH, RDN, LDN, is a professor of nutrition and dietetic internship director at the University of Rhode Island. His research interests span the lifespan from childhood obesity prevention to improving dietary intake in older adults, with an emphasis on interventions based on the Transtheoretical model of behavior change. In addition, he has developed assessment instructions and interventions related to environmentally conscious eating behavior in college students. He's an active member of USDA NIFA Multistate NC1193, designed to improve dietary behaviors and health outcomes in young adults. He has been funded by the National Institute of Health and National Institute of Food and Agriculture.
Good afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about green eating, particularly the development of green eating instruments. My name is Geoff Greene, and I'm from the University of Rhode Island. First, a little bit of an outline. We'll talk about an overview of green eating, as well as an overview of the Transtheoretical model, also known as the stages of change model. We'll talk about stage of change for green eating, about the green eating behavior scale, about follow-up studies, and finally end with strengths and limitations. We all know what a problem we have with our food system, that it affects both land, water, and air. And the biggest contributor to the problem is the US consumer. And we could reduce use of resources and carbon emissions by behavior change. And that's the whole background. Green eating is personal choices within the food system that can be considered more sustainable. We'll talk about the literature review. We'll talk about the literature review where we found the dimensions of green eating were environmental protection, personal health, ethics, and social impacts. And a little background on the Transtheoretical model. This model has been found to be effective in developing interventions for college students, as well as many other populations. And it's the theoretical background of this instrument development studies. The central organizing construct in this model would be stages of change, or the temporal dimension. These stages can be considered as pre-contemplation, no intention of changing in the foreseeable future, contemplation, thinking about change, preparation, actively preparing to change in the near future, action, having made a significant change in the recent past, and maintenance, maintaining the behavior change. Applying the Transtheoretical model to green eating, we have since this is a new area, we had to develop measures. We had to develop a stage of change algorithm, which could classify participants to one of those 5 stages, and an instrument to assess green eating behavior. Just want to point out that our study developed 2 additional instruments for green eating, decisional balance and self-efficacy, but we don't have time to review those today. So the principal goal of measurement is develop valid and reliable measures. And we started with a literature review. And this ended up with generating items for the survey. We next had cognitive interviews to assess students' perceptions of these items, as well as perceptions of stage. We had the items reviewed by an expert panel, refined the items, added additional items, and developed a pilot survey. Finally, we finalized our survey and tested it out. For the analyses, we used factor analyses for the green eating behavior scale. We split our sample at an initial principal component analysis to identify psychometric structure, and items that didn't fit on the scales were eliminated. Then we did confirmatory factor analysis to finalize the scale and structural occasion modeling to finish it. We then moved on to validation studies, looking at relationships by stages. Our final survey was of University of Rhode Island students, 18 to 24 years of age, who responded to the item. Our final sample was 954 that met those criteria. They were pretty young, more females than males, and predominantly white. Stage of change for green eating algorithm, which you have attached to your materials from this conference. This stage of change algorithm is eating locally grown foods, limited amount of processed fast foods, meatless meals once a day, 1 day a week, choosing organic foods as much as possible, and only taking what you plan on eating. After reading this definition, the participant responds to one of those mutually exclusive choices. The parentheses are not in the item itself. It's just used for scoring purposes. The stage of change for this sample, you can see, was predominantly pre-contemplation. It's no intention of changing in the foreseeable future. And only 27% were in the action or maintenance stages. This is the final structural equation model for the green eating behaviors. As you can see, it included all three themes. The specific items are listed here, and you have them in your conference materials. The dietary behaviors related to the stage of change were cups of fruit. The people in action, participants in action or maintenance, had a greater intake of fruits and vegetables, and a smaller intake of fast food. Maintenance was lower than the other stages for red meat consumption, and maintenance was also more likely to do home meal preparation. Action maintenance didn't have, a smaller proportion had no campus meal plan, and there was a greater proportion of vegetarians in action or maintenance. These food-related behaviors validated the stage construct. An additional validation was that the green eating behavior increased linearly across stage. from a low in pre-contemplation to a high in maintenance. So in conclusion, these variables validated the stage of change for green eating because different relationships differed across the stages. But as I said before, almost 70% were not ready to adopt green eating behaviors. The measures are valid and reliable and should be further tested to assess green eating behaviors and future interventions, as well as for assessment, for environmental assessment at different institutions. However, further research is needed to explore current awareness of environmental impacts. We then did 2 follow-up studies, a descriptive study of stage of change at different schools, and an intervention study with the idea that this will let us know if the instruments are sensitive to change. The first study was an assessment of behavior at 3 Northeastern universities, 1 private and 2 public, assessed by online surveys. We predicted that students at the private university would be more likely to be in action and maintenance than the public universities, based on previous research that shown greater environmental concern at private than public universities. The second study was called the Green Eating Project. It was an intervention study, and the outcome was measured by these instruments. Our hypothesis was that intervention would have greater change than control. First study, we found, just as predicted, a higher proportion of students were in action or maintenance at the private university than the public universities, which is a further validation of the stage of change algorithm. Also indicates that it can be used at other universities. It is generalizable. Moving on to the green eating intervention, this was an online interactive intervention. It was a quasi-experimental design with 4 modules, and this just shows you the flow chart. There was a significant difference between groups for behavior. The experimental group increased green eating behaviors compared to control. Control didn't change very much. Experimental did. There was also an change in stage. There was no difference in stage of change at baseline, but there was at follow-up. Experimental group was less likely to be in pre-contemplation, more likely to be in preparation or action than the control. So the study demonstrated instruments were sensitive to change and that the green eating intervention was effective. Strengths, it's an important topic, lays the groundwork, they're reliable measures, they have strong psychometrics, they can be generalized. Limitations are, it's only designed for college students, limited item breadth, and may need to assess instruments for special populations in the future. So in conclusion, valid and reliable measures are sensitive to change, but most students are not ready to take meaningful action. We need to do further research to explore the themes, additional constructs, relationships between green eating and health, and develop new interventions. Finally, it's your job to help the planet by green eating. Thank you.
I was unaware that organic foods had an impact on the carbon footprint of the eater. Can you go more in depth as to how that occurs?
We were basing this on the perceptions of the college students, what they thought environmentally sustainable eating behaviors were. It does not necessarily mean that any one of those specific items is that critical for improving the environment. What it's reflecting is the perception of these students. So that certainly we can have additional work to refine those items in the future. However, this was based on the cognitive interviews and perceptions of students, what they thought the construct of green eating was.
Interesting, thank you. I'd like to remind everyone that if you as additionally have questions, to write them in the chat. I have one more. Did you observe a correlation between the age or the level in school and the stages of change?
To be honest with you, I can't remember. But generally speaking, you would expect to see the first few years would have lower readiness than the upper years. But I don't remember if that was a significant finding or not. Good question. But at our university, the majority of the first year students would be living on campus, and their choices are somewhat more restricted than somebody who is living independently and cooking for themselves.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Greene, we have another question. The question is, I wonder if it's possible that students' lack of financial literacy could impact their perceived notation towards green eating?
I'm not sure if the issue is financial literacy as much as finances. I was just discussing with one of my colleagues how ultra-processed food is cheaper than food prepared from scratch. So the choices for green eating may be driven by perceived economic pressures. Obviously, a student with greater financial literacy presumably would be more able to budget effectively, but they still will be facing these financial issues. And I think this is something that all of us need to be very aware of, is the potential impact on the dietary quality of the increase in food prices.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greene.